on your camera. So please switch on your cameras and we can see each other to create like a space, common space. And first of all, I want to say to people who speak English, please look in the bottom of a screen. There is a button which called interpretation. It's like a planet. Yeah, maybe you can see it right now, or if you're not, click three dots and you will see this interpretation, and please choose English channel. Then you will hear every English information, including translation. And for Ukrainian people, I will tell in Ukraine. So if you struggling to do something, have any question, technical question, please write it to the chat and we will help you. Yeah. Okay. So does everyone can switch to English channel? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. So I will go to Ukraine channel. Так, мене чутно?
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm in Ukrainian channel now.
Привіт усім ще раз.
Hi all once again.
Я дуже радий бачити тут так багато
I'm very happy to see so many faces here. Some of them are familiar, some of them are new, but anyhow, I'm happy that this lecture and this series of lectures has evoked such interest. And before we start, I would like to say a couple of words. My name is Alexey Vinogradov, and I'm the president of Gestalt Research Association, who organized this cycle of lectures. And today we have an important day for two reasons. First of all, we are glad to greet Philip Brownell in our Gestalt Research Association. He will give a cycle of lectures about scientific approach in Gestalt therapy. And Philip is quite a prominent person in this scientific field of Gestalt. He has made and continues making a huge contribution into Gestalt sphere. I will say something about Philip. Philip is a doctor of clinical psychology, a licensed clinical psychologist. He is an editor of a fundamental handbook for theory, research, and practice in Gestalt therapy. If you didn't read that, and he also is the author of numerous articles, chapters of books, and is also a practicing Gestalt therapist, supervisor, and a trainer with many years of experience. And what's also important to mention, today is a special day for another reason. Today is February 24. It's the anniversary of full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine. And 4 years ago, Russia has started its destructive, bloody campaign against, a provoked campaign against Ukraine, and there is no Ukrainian who do not experience the consequences of this terrible war. And this lecture, we keep working, keep struggling, and in spite of all the difficulties, we continue learning and developing and growing, and this lecture is the proof of that. And instability, unfortunately, is spreading worldwide. And I want to remind to Gestalt therapists, to all of us, that it's not the circumstances are trying to do with us, it's the way we react on those circumstances. And besides, I would like to say a couple of words about our Gestalt Research Association. I'm glad that we have found it with my colleagues. There is a community of people who love science and Gestalt, and we want to be useful and to bring fresh glance on our professional activity. And I think the time has come to pay more attention to Gestalt research and to make our method more evidence-based and more clinically proved. And if you are interested in researches, if you want to understand more and to contribute into that, please join our association, or you can donate, support it financially, and that will allow us to start more important projects. And I want to remind you that our activity is for free, and all the lectures also are free, and all the information and links how to join. You can fill an application form, or how you can support us financially. We will post it into the chat of this current Zoom conference. And at the end, a separate special thank you to Phil for agreeing making this cycle of webinars. There is not much information about Gestalt science, and it's very important that you share this experience and doing it sincerely and warmly. And thank you for being open to start this project and this special day for us. And we really appreciate that and your warm support. So I'm passing the floor to you.
Thank you, Alexei. It's a privilege to be here with you. And my hope for these lectures is that they could be the start of a community, a warm community of researchers in Ukraine and beyond. For some time, I've felt that it was necessary to have a dedicated Gestalt research organization. At a previous Gestalt research conference, I shared that vision. And so then what was created is the research database, which is very useful, but it's not the same thing as an organization. And an organization can do so much more. So when you created this one, it came as a surprise to me, and I kind of said, oh, well, look at that. So I'm really happy to be here with everyone, and I'm happy to see you, Sam. Good to see you. Hi. Okay, I'm going to share the screen. I have some slides here. I have some things that to share with you. They're in English, I'm sorry, but the slide deck will be made available. People can translate it as they have ability to do that. And in the future, maybe we can get them translated ahead of time. So I want to check something. Is my rate of speech okay for the translator? Yes or no?
Yeah, it's just fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. So I'm going to share the screen. And there we go. Adjust it a little bit here. Okay. So this lecture is on Gestalt therapy research. It's very introductory. It's just sort of laying the ground for things that will come later. And so before I get into that, I also want to acknowledge that this is February 24th. And I want to read something to you from a book that I've just finishing about the time that my wife and I actually came to Kyiv, and that was about a year and a half, something like that, after the war began. 1 year and 7 months after the invasion started, Linda and I stood at the edge of the blown bridge. I looked from the edge of the road at debris lying in the riverbed. Looking back toward Kyiv, I could see large metal tank obstacles in the street leading into the city. When the refugees from Irpin and Bucha, Hostomel, and the surrounding areas streamed across that riverbed, stepping carefully on the debris, the water rushed by around them. It was a trickle when we were there. After crossing the river, we came to a large pile of burned and rusted cars. It was about 3 vehicles deep and 4 wide, and it stretched about 2/3 of a football field. These were the cars that people had been driving, trying to escape the Russians. Before they had been pushed back to Bucha, Russian troops stopped people trying to escape, shot them, and burned their cars. They shot whole families, including little children. The Ukrainians had piled their vehicles there, painted colorful Ukrainian flags over the reddish-brown rust and burn marks. They put large, cheerful sunflowers all over them. They wrote words I could not understand. Here and there at the base of the pile were children's toys, alone and cold. It was a memorial, but it was also a clenched fist raised to the sky. And you all still have that fist raised to the sky. And I do too, in whatever way that I can. Alexei sent me some questions that you had. And when I read them, I was amazed. I was touched. I felt like, wow, there is a group here that can really do something. So I want to go through these a little bit and respond to them. I'm not going to get into a great deal of detail. We have examples of Gestalt therapy research to look at, so I want to leave enough time for that. So first one here, how can a practitioner conduct valid research within a private practice setting? We're going to get to that in the next lecture, the one on research design. What are the current standards for organizing research, specifically for master's and PhD levels? I don't really understand that question too much. It's there's another question in another set of questions from English-speaking people that referred to this distinction between master's level and PhD level. Let me just say that, to my knowledge, people, whether they have a master's degree or a PhD or a doctor level, can both engage in research. In fact, in the United States anyway, in university, the professor will gather a group of students around them who may not even have their master's yet. They're just a bachelor level, and he will enlist them in a research project that he's working on. And so they'll all work on it. And when they write the thing up, those people will also receive credit. So I don't see a big distinction. Maybe somebody who shared that can make that more understandable to me what the concern is. Could you elaborate on the stages of empirical research, formative experiments, and the search for scientific novelty? Where's the line between valuable and non-valuable findings? We're going to get into that one when we look at when we have the lecture on kind of statistical things about validity and effect sizes, things like that. And I have to admit, I am not a mathematical wizard. In fact, I think I am mathematically disabled. I think it had something to do with when I was a kid. I jumped into a pool and hit my head on something, and it hasn't been the same since. But I don't do math very well. So when I am involved in a research project, I have to get somebody come in whose specialty is statistics. But I know enough to be able to share some of these statistical ideas with you, and that's what we'll do at that time. Does a solid evidence base for Gestalt therapy exist today? Well, yes and no. If you're saying by quantity, no, because we don't have that much of it yet. If you're talking about quality, yes, because some very significant research is starting to be done. And in the research movement or tradition, I've noticed that we've grown up a little bit. Instead of being babies crawling around on the floor, we're now young children, and we're running around and investigating the world and starting to be able to do things. And it's really exciting to see what Gestalt therapy researchers are doing. Interest in the phenomenon of presence and the study of psychosomatic symptoms in Gestalt therapy. To the person who wrote that, I say, great. That sounds like the beginning of a research project. And I would invite everybody that's listening or watching to think about that. If we start or create a research community among Gestalt people in Ukraine, say that's where it's happening right now, so that's what I'll say. Then it becomes a real community, and people affect each other and help each other and can contribute and work together, and it's just a new way of experiencing being a Gestalt therapist. When I got into Gestalt therapy, it was just completely experiential. I had no theory. Later on, when I trained in theory and in a formal training group, it was new to me, and I had to take on the various theoretical components and really work hard to feel like I understood what they were. And since the theory is constantly evolving, that's a never-ending project. But really, at this point, it's the Gestalt therapy is kind of who I am. It's a much more natural way of being for me. And that's the way being a Gestalt researcher becomes. It's a more natural way of being in the world, seeing the world, evaluating information, things like that. I'll tell you a story. So we had the very first International Gestalt Therapy Research Conference. It was at Cape Cod at the Gestalt International Training Center or whatever. I forget what their title is at this point. So it just so
Can
happened.
you repeat the title? Pardon me.
I wish I could. I can't remember the name of the place. Anyway, so we had the meeting at their meeting. We had the conference at their meeting house in Cape Cod. And it just so happened that the leadership of the AAGT, it's now called the IAAGT, but the AAGT, Association for the Advancement of Gestalt Therapy, their leadership wanted to have their leadership meeting at the same time. And so they decided that they would attend the conference. Now, before that, everybody had been really very cold toward the idea of research. People would say, I'm a therapist. I don't want to do research. I'm not a researcher. And they had the idea that research was some kind of cold mathematical thing, watching rats get shocked by electricity, some very uninteresting kind of thing. And so they sat in on some of the presentations and saw what people were doing even back then. And that was about 12, 13 years ago. It changed them. They got excited. They could see that the people that were presenting were certainly excited. And everybody who had come from different places in the world to be there, they were excited, and it was contagious. And so that's the kind of thing that happens in a community. And we need a Gestalt therapy research community, like hopefully what's happening in Ukraine, to really help the tradition move along and develop. Okay. How to adapt research designs for body-oriented work, such as emotional outbursts of aggression. There's another research project we could talk about. How to effectively measure the impact of Gestalt therapy on clients with depressive disorders. That research has been done in some, I don't have it to share today, but it's available. And when I say it's been done, it doesn't mean it's been done in quantity. It's been done in quality. And we'll talk about the quality thing that I'm referring to when we get into the next lecture on research design. How does the reality of war break or reshape the conventional research framework? I don't think it really changes what research is, the framework, if you're talking about what is research. Research is research, whether there's a war going on or not. But what it does is it makes it more difficult to conduct research. And particular kinds of research, especially if you're doing group studies, it would be harder to gather a group together that are just trying to survive in many places in Ukraine. How do you distinguish between a client's genuine spiritual experience and psychological defenses without devaluing either? I love that question. But that's not for this particular time. Maybe we can get to that in a conversation later on. It's more involved. How can a therapist remain in contact with the client's spiritual themes without overstepping professional boundaries? That is largely what I wrote a book about. It's and what the post-secular approach to psychotherapy addresses. And that's another whole webinar series. Which validity metrics are used to measure here and now effects, and do they relate to your Templeton project? Validity metrics, yeah, we'll talk about validity, reliability, things like that in the next, I think of this two lectures down. Are there currently validated scales specifically for Gestalt processes? Yes, there are, and we're going to look at one of them today. We're doing that time. What for you is the ultimate sign that therapy is truly helping, even when pain and loss remain? That is a great question. That goes to back up a bit. What's the difference between what it does is it goes to the definition of validity and significance, those two things. And we'll talk about those in another lecture. Which internal resources of the therapist are decisive when working with deep trauma and existential crises? So now what you're asking, or what that question asks, is the same thing that would drive a person to read research. And if there's one thing that I hope to accomplish here today with you, it is that people would understand the value of reading research literature. I'm not sure, how do we measure, how many, I want to ask the question, how many of you already read research literature? You read a fair amount of it, you know, like 10 articles or more? Raise a hand. Okay, I can't see everybody. Can somebody tell me how many hands are being raised? Let's see.
Небагато, я так бачу, 3, 4, 5, можливо.
Not many, but I see maybe 3, 4, 5.
Okay,
Гаразд.
great. Great in the sense that I'm not going to be redundant too much here, I think, hopefully. All right. Types of Gestalt therapy research. Maria, do you need a break?
Sorry, no. I just raised my hand for reading articles, and I will lower it. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a misunderstanding.
Okay. So it used to be that when we started off trying to advocate for research and realizing that we needed to have research in order to keep Gestalt viable in the larger field, because the larger field had moved into an evidence-based mentality. And Gestalt therapy didn't have an evidence base, really. So we needed to get one, or we needed to point to something and say, well, no, look, we do have research. Here it is. And so what people pointed to when in the early days, especially, and it's still around that way, is something that I would not call specifically research on Gestalt therapy. And I wrote an article or a chapter in an APA, American Psychological Association handbook on humanistic approaches. The article is about Gestalt therapy, and of course they wanted to know about the research base. And so I pointed to what was available, but I had to distinguish 3 kinds of research on Gestalt, or on what was called Gestalt therapy. And so this is it. It's 3 kinds of that you will find 3 kinds of research that is called Gestalt therapy or related to Gestalt therapy. So the first one here, right up here, if you can see that cursor going around, Gestalt specific research. That is research that is focused on Gestalt therapy, the practice of Gestalt therapy as described in standard texts, and that people find in established training groups. So, and I take a sidebar here to acknowledge that there's not just a one size fits all kind of specifically Gestalt therapy, even in this category. Why do I say that? Because we have people who teach what I would call classic Gestalt therapy. And then there are some people who teach what is called, I don't know, contemporary Gestalt therapy or a field perspective type Gestalt therapy. So you have now different schools of Gestalt therapy. But all of those schools can be found in standard texts, and they're taught in various training groups, which I would call legitimate training groups. So the research done on that particular kind of Gestalt therapy is Gestalt specific research. Okay, but what was being pointed to early on was something else. It was what I called Gestalt hybrid research. So this is where Gestalt techniques, are used along with somebody else's particular approach to doing psychotherapy. So, and examples of that currently are emotion-focused therapy, started actually by Leslie Greenberg, who was a Gestalt trained person, but who was really more Rogerian and so person-centered or interpersonal. And he used Gestalt experiments, but that became stuck and formalized in what's called chair work. So Les talks and has written and done research on the value of chair work. And so that was early on, that was referred to as research that we claimed because it was using a technique from Gestalt therapy, but I would say that wasn't really specifically Gestalt therapy. Schema therapy is another example of that. It's more cognitive than in theory, basically, but the people that practice schema therapy use Gestalt techniques to accomplish some of the things that they want to accomplish. So it's also experiential, strongly experiential. Okay, so the third category is what I call Gestalt conciliant. This term conciliance points to an overlapping ideas in some way. It's not to say that, see my hand here, it's an overlap. It's not a joining. It's not a synthesis kind of a thing. It's an overlap. So in the overlap, there are similarities. One example of that is mindfulness. Mindfulness started by extracting points from Buddhism. And John Kabat-Zinn started something a program which was aimed at reducing stress. So mindfulness stress reduction. And the research on that was very popular and very positive. And so the larger field started appropriating mindfulness. And now you have such things as mindfulness-based CBT, for instance. And mindfulness seems to be well accepted in the larger field. So some people in Gestalt therapy would use that and say, well, see, mindfulness is Gestalt. It's not exactly Gestalt, but it's similar enough that when we look at research on mindfulness, we can say, there's reason to believe that the Gestalt concept of awareness share in some of the research support. In other words, the research support for mindfulness suggests there is research that there is support for awareness in Gestalt therapy. Okay. Any questions? Any comments? Anything like that? Now's the time for that kind of a thing.
У мене питання,
дозвольте.
да, давайте.
So I have a question. May I please?
Ті приклади, ті вірніше
Those
назви напрямків, які ви
examples,
назвали,
so the
приклади,
schools,
чи
the
це
directions that you've named,
лише ці
are
напрями
those
ви вважаєте
just examples,
гештальтові?
or do you consider only those directions to be called like Gestalt therapy or Gestalt research areas?
I'm not quite sure I understand, but I would say that you can find, and we're going to look at examples of each of these research articles that are examples of each of these. So you can find each of these kinds of Gestalt type research Gestalt conciliant, Gestalt hybrid, and Gestalt specific research. You'll run across all of those in the research. Is that what you meant, or were you referring to the schools of Gestalt therapy that I mentioned?
Дякую за відповідь. Я мала на увазі саме
Thank you
це.
for your
Ви
answer.
просто
So that
продовжуєте,
was
що
that
ви
I meant.
Чи ви
That
визнались,
were those only the
саме в цьому
examples
полягає
that those
моя
types of
цікавість?
researches are
Бо я
just
прочитала
exist, or was
в
that
школі.
like the whole list, the full list of all types of Gestalt research that exist? Because I'm the representative of some.
Okay, so these are categories of research, not specific research projects. Each one of these would have many different research projects in them. Any other questions?
Дякую.
У мене є питання, якщо ми
I
кажемо
have a
про
question. If we say about Gestalt conciliant research,
чи означає це, що
does it
якщо,
mean
наприклад, в тому ж mindfulness ми бачимо якісь дослідження, і воно
that
співпадає
if we see in
концептуально,
some
філософськи,
mindfulness,
гештальт підходом, ми можемо його
some
брати
research,
як
and it coincides
доказ
in its
такого
conceptual
фокусу?
approach, in its mindset, with some Gestalt principles. Can we take it as an example of Gestalt research?
If you could go back in time, if you could go back in time,
посилатись на це.
go ahead, Maria. What?
Ти
Okay.
в українському каналі. Ти в українському каналі, Маш.
And so, pardon, can we then refer to that research? Can we give the give this research as an example of research in Gestalt?
I would say no. Earlier on in the development of our Gestalt research tradition, people would have done that, but not now. Now, what it is, the way to use it is to say, this suggests for use mindfulness, for instance. Mindfulness in schema therapy and emotion focused therapy suggests, or whatever, I'm making something up that doesn't fit. Mindfulness suggests awareness in Gestalt therapy. So now here's a research project on specific Gestalt therapy, the concept of awareness. I garbled that. Did you follow?
Тобто, якщо ми умовно робимо
So
дослідження
if
щодо
we
усвідомлення
conduct a
гештальт-терапії, ми
research on
можемо
awareness in
ці
Gestalt
проведені
therapy,
дослідження
then we can refer to
mindfulness.
the studies that were made in the area of mindfulness, right? We use them somehow.
You can, but what it does is it's broadens the figure. Instead of the specific clear figure of awareness, when you bring in mindfulness, now you're broadening. It's like you're blurring the edges of the figure and you're broadening the figure and saying, oh, this is related to mindfulness, but it's not specifically mindfulness.
Дякую.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Julia?
Я б хотіла задати питання.
I would like to
Дякую.
ask a question.
Скажіть, будь
Thank
ласка,
you.
в цьому циклі лекцій,
Can you say
які
that within
заплановані,
this
більше
cycle of
буде
lecture that
сфокусовано на
was planned,
гештальт-специфічних
will you
дослідженнях,
focus more on
чи також
Gestalt specific
буде
research,
приділятися
or
увага і
will you
іншим
also
категоріям?
focus on the next two types, categories that were mentioned?
So today I want to share articles on the types of, like research articles. And this refers to then research projects that have been done. When we get into the next set of the rest of the series, we're going to be looking at more specific topics within the area of research itself. I'm open to entertaining any questions that people have, and going where the need seems to be. I don't want to stick rigidly with an outline. I'll have an outline like I have today, but I've already diverged from it a little bit. And in the future, we can do that. So whatever questions, concerns, interests that you have, I will try to address those as well.
Дякую за відповідь.
Okay,
Thank you for your answer.
let's move on so we can get through some of this stuff. Here's example one of Gestalt conciliant research. How many people have heard of acceptance and commitment therapy? Ever heard of that? I don't know. I can't tell. Raise your hand if you've heard of acceptance and commitment therapy. All right. Acceptance and commitment therapy. Great. Good. So acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT or ACT, actually is beginning to rival cognitive behavioral therapy for the degree of its research foundation, its research support, its evidence base. And it's very popular, and it's conciliant with Gestalt therapy. And I hope that I will be able to show you in what way. So this is the abstract of an article, which is in very small print right up here. The effects of acceptance and commitment therapy training on clinicians' knowledge and use of ACT with children and adolescents, from the journal Professional Psychology, Research and Practice, an advanced online publication. And so this is the abstract from it. So I'm going to go down here to the next slide, which now shows in red those things which I think overlap with Gestalt therapy, so would be conciliant with Gestalt therapy. So ACT is a trans-diagnostic intervention that incorporates acceptance and mindfulness. Okay, acceptance to me is suggestive of the paradoxical theory of change. Paradoxical theory of change says, don't try to change and be what you're not, be what you are, accept who you are. Now, what ACT says is don't not only accept who you are as a person, but accept the circumstances that you're in also. Just start, that's the starting point. And so then they also refer to mindfulness, and we already talked about that. Now, the next one, ACT's primary goal is to increase psychological flexibility, which is defined as the ability to make contact fully with the present moment and make value-based decisions when challenging thoughts, feelings, and sensations arise. contact. I mean, we couldn't have a more central thing to Gestalt therapy than contact, I think. Many people would say it is the center of Gestalt therapy. So here is an approach that all is reminiscent of the paradoxical theory of change, awareness, and contact. Then now going further, it says ACT posits that attempts at changing our uncomfortable experiences are often counterproductive and unsuccessful. It goes back to the paradoxical theory of change, but then hints that actually there's evidence that trying to change something currently doesn't work all that well. So I might say that in passing here that the founder of ACT, his name is Stephen Hayes, is as down on CBT. Don't think of it this way, think of it that way, as most Gestalt therapists. He's not a real fan. Okay, then the ACT model involves 6 core processes that provide a framework for developing psychological flexibility. And they are acceptance, cognitive diffusion. So that is where you're working with someone and you're exploring their phenomenological experience of the moment or of a situation. And as you explore it, it's not that you say, don't think of it this way, think of it that way. It's that you suggest maybe there are other ways to see it. So it would introduce something that I found in considering dialogue in Gestalt therapy, where in a couple's work, for instance, the husband looks at it one way, the wife looks at it another way. What happens, husband, when you look at it the way your wife looks at it? And then we work on him really kind of hearing her, listening to her. So diffusion is breaking up a stuck gestalt, a fixed gestalt, and helping the person reformulate their gestalt. Okay, so diffusion, present moment awareness, self as context. So they get into what self is, the person, the self, the theory of self. Values and committed action. So it is kind of like related to behaviorism or even like the experiential aspects of Gestalt. I sat in on a training lecture that I had to do for my continuing education credits, and it was given by Stephen Hayes. And he started off the entire thing with the first slide was a picture of various people in the Hall of Fame of psychotherapy, the history of psychotherapy. And right there, among all the pictures of these people's, their headshots, was the front cover of a book. And the book was Pearls, Hefferline, and Goodman's book, the book we call the Bible of Gestalt Therapy. And he brought the people's focus to the second author of that book, Ralph Hefferline. And he said Ralph Hefferline was a behaviorist. We didn't say this particularly, but this is what I know. Ralph Hefferline was a behaviorist who wrote a large first portion of that book, PhD, and the entire thing is behavioral exercises to heighten various things like awareness or work with different kinds of aspects of the overall project. So not only is ACT consilient in its theory, it was instrumental in the thinking of Stephen Hayes when he created ACT, he and his colleagues. Okay. And here's another article. This is another abstract, actually. I'm not reading through the entire articles here. That would take up way too much time. So this article is Internet-based acceptance and commitment therapy for transdiagnostic treatment of comorbid post-traumatic stress disorder and chronic pain. It was a pilot study.
Can you slow down, please? Can you say once again? Because very little letters. So,
Okay, I'll say it again. Internet-based acceptance and commitment therapy for transdiagnostic. Hold it. Transdiagnostic. We're seeing that term a lot these days in the research literature, and all it means is instead of being focused on just an approach to deal with anxiety, for instance, or depression, for instance, it deals with many different diagnostic categories. It's useful for many different diagnostic categories. And so this article is pointed at this particular approach, transdiagnostic treatment of comorbid, along with whatever else is going on, post-traumatic stress disorder and chronic pain. Seems like that would be a very relevant topic for people in Ukraine. So acceptance and commitment therapy. Let's see, did I do the red thing here? No. Okay, I didn't do red here because this is getting into the design of it a little bit more. So, okay, I'll read it. So acceptance and commitment therapy is a transdiagnostic behavioral treatment focusing on common processes behind different diagnoses. Internet-based treatment. And so here's the method by which they studied it. This is a pre and post follow-up pilot study. It's in other words, they did an initial study so that they could lay a ground for doing a more detailed and more relevant or important study. To examine accessibility, safety, and effectiveness of internet-based ACT for chronic pain and PTSD. Yeah. Then they tell you the study went over for 10 weeks. There was measures done before and after. And the results provided preliminary evidence for the acceptability, safety, and effectiveness of doing ACT over the internet. So that suggests future research. And let me say this about research. There's no research project. There is not one single research project that is going to answer a big question. Does Gestalt therapy work? Initially, our colleagues that I would talk with when we were starting to try to develop research would say, I don't have to do research to know if Gestalt therapy works. I've been doing Gestalt therapy and I know that it works, which on the face of it is great for that person. That's one person and one person's experience. No research project is going to answer that question for everybody in every situation. So research is all about getting little pieces of the issue. getting little pieces, or doing a follow-up study to say, yes, we got the same results when so-and-so did their little piece. So it's building ground so that you have an overwhelming impact, taking many research articles and projects into consideration. That is why we need a research organization to build a community of people who will have the long view in mind. And I say that knowing that I have been in doing this now for advocating for research for maybe, I don't know, 15 years at least. And I've seen the growth. I have seen the growth, but we're not there yet. We do not have what's necessary to say we are a legitimate research proven approach. We need lots of little projects. So anyway, that was a sidebar. So this is the ACT is an example, along with, like I said, motion focused therapy and schema therapy of, no, I'm sorry. So mindfulness based is another example. So ACT, mindfulness based research, that kind of thing. All right. Where are you at? Am I losing people with this reading thing here? Tell me what's going on for you.
Я трошечки втратив головну думку. Ну, тобто тут
I've
є
lost a
приклад
bit the key
дослідження
idea.
конкретного, яке
Here there
показує,
is
що
a
були
specific
там з 10
example
людьми, які
of
бачили, як стосується до
research.
гештальту.
And what does it have to do with Gestalt?
This is an example of research done on a Gestalt consilient theory or approach to psychotherapy. ACT, I would say, is Gestalt consilient. And here's a research project done on that particular approach. So this is the abstract of that research article. Now, I'm not going to show you the whole thing and go through it. Let me just say, a typical research article will have an abstract, which describes the whole thing at the beginning. It's sort of a summary. And then it will have a background section, often called the literature review, where the researchers talk about the general situation that made them curious about something. And then they will get toward the end of that first section, sometimes it's called the introduction, sometimes the article just launches right into that first section. At the end of that, they will bring up what is called the research question. What is it that we wanted to find out? This is where we take the whole broader situation that they've been talking about and they bring it down to a specific point. This is what we want to find out about. In this article, what they wanted to find out is internet-based ACT useful? So, or is ACT, you can only do that face-to-face, or can you do it on the internet? Can we do ACT on the internet? That's what they wanted to find out. Okay, so then the next section is called the methods section, and they're going to, in that section, the researcher Thanks, Alexia. I'm glad you've got it, but I want to tell people about the sections of research. Method section tells how they're going to do the study. They're going to do it in groups, or they're going to do individuals. They're going to do who are these people that they use to study it, all that kind of a thing. So here's the groups. Here's the measures that we're going to use to measure the effects. Okay, and then there's the results section. The results section is not what you think it is, might think it is. The results section is very technical. It's just very technical. It gives the statistical, mathematical results of different groups. It's very boring to me, frankly. It wouldn't be for somebody that understands statistics, but not for me. So then comes the discussion. And that's the part that I'm really interested in. That's the part where what they do is they kind of take the whole thing together now from the beginning. What were we interested in? And what did we find out technically? And what do those technical statistical results suggest to us? Oh, it looks like there is support for doing ACT on the internet. Looks like we could do that. So what do we need to do now to further support this idea? Well, we need to do, or other people need to do this and this and this to expand on the research. So those are the sections of a research article. Why read research articles if you're not a researcher? Because they deal with interesting subjects. That's what the AAGT leadership found out in person at the first research conference. Oh, my goodness, look what people are interested in. Look what they're doing. And that was interesting to them. And so, and then in the first section where the researchers are laying the ground, they're talking about the field of this particular issue that they're going to bring up. That's interesting because often you find there just stuff you don't usually find in other places, the way they're talking about it, the theory, the practice, things like that. And then jump over the methods section, jump over the results section, and go to the discussion. Because in the discussion, the authors will talk about the results, the statistical results, but they'll do it in non-mathematical ways that help you understand, oh, okay, so this is what they did and this is what they found. And why they think it's significant or what should be done next, that kind of a thing. So that's why to read research articles. Now, as you get more into it and you know more about the statistical analysis and all that kind of a thing, then some of those details become very interesting too. And then you become adept at evaluating one research project compared to another one. So you can say, for instance, well, this group of people did this kind of method, and yeah, that really kind of didn't hit the mark. But this group of people's methodology was really spot on, and that's what allows us to be able to say blah, blah, blah at the bottom. Does this make sense to people? I hope it does. Okay, example 2, Gestalt hybrid research. Now, this is EFT, emotion-focused therapy, and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is certain forms of it, like mindfulness-based CBT. Okay, so what makes it a hybrid? Chair work. Chair work is prominently represented in many treatment packages for individual psychotherapy, including Gestalt therapy, emotion-focused therapy, schema therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. I realized I was speaking too fast. So they say enactments, which refer to expression of one thoughts and feelings into action through dramatization, resolved interpersonal conflict, blah, blah, blah. So this is basically much more cut and dried to me than conciliant type issues, because this is just where they're saying, they claim they refer to Gestalt therapy, that's what they do now, but sometimes it will say Gestalt based. And so this one was chair work for individual psychotherapy. It was a meta-analysis comparing lots of different individual research projects, looking for intervention effects. This talks about it more for some reason. That put that there. And this, where do I do that? Oh. Okay. Okay, so this one is more to the point in many ways. This is a hybrid, example of a hybrid. But what these researchers did, they're out of Germany. And the article is called, "What Was Helpful in Today's Session? Responses of Clients in 2 Different Psychotherapies for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder." So Willie Batolo has done a lot of work in developing what he calls dialogical exposure therapy. So this is kind of a mix between Gestalt conciliant and hybrid. So because he uses chair work also, but he gets into the dialogical end of things. That's where he brings the Gestalt approach in. And Willie is a Gestalt therapist. It's just, he's one of those people that kind of gave up, I think. He kind of looked around and said, nobody's going to want to hear about Gestalt therapy anymore. I have to give it a different name. I have to create something else. And then I can talk about Gestalt stuff. I can do Gestalt, but not call it Gestalt. Because as soon as anybody sees Gestalt, they turn off because they think that's passé. It's from the past. So what he did is he created this thing called dialogical exposure therapy, and he's done a lot of research on it. And in fact, he's done group efficacy studies, which I'll talk about more when we get to that lecture. But they're the gold standard of research. Random controlled trials, RCTs is what they're called. That's the gold standard of evidence-based, any evidence base. It's where you have a group over here who are, we're not going to do anything with them. They're just going to sit. Then we have another group over here. These are the people we're going to do the treatment with that we're curious about. Now, we're going to test both groups before we get started. And then we're going to test both groups at the end and see if there's any difference between them. That's the gold standard. And we choose the people that go into these groups at random. So we can't just choose our favorite people for one group and our other, and stack the deck against one group or the other. We can't do that. Have to be at random. So that's that. And I like what he put down here. So this is where it brings it home and says, okay, this is kind of like, yeah, this is Gestalt. Dialogical exposure is not about habituation, but about finding a way to preserve one's self processes while in imagined contact with the perpetrator. in a modified version of the empty chair
Yeah, please,
paradigm.
can you slow down, please, because it's a little bit like complicated. Can you say like the dialogical exposure is not about habituation? So, but then,
Yeah, I'll say it again. Let me say this again. Dialogical exposure is not about habituation, but about finding a way to preserve one's self processes while in the imagined contact with the perpetrator. So what does that mean? That means the classic way of dealing with trauma has always been, for a long time anyway, exposure, re-exposure to it in a controlled way, in a controlled way, so that you work through what happened with the person who is traumatized. Well, that really just re-traumatized people. That's what people found. This is a slow way and in contact, in the presence, in dialogue with the therapist, reimagining. If it was contact with a sex offender, one thing. If it's contact with the combat situation, if it's contact with people who got killed by a missile, it's revisiting the traumatic experience in a controlled fashion, so that as he says here, the self functions of Gestalt therapy can assimilate the experience. And you do that in dialogue with the therapist so that they're not alone with the trauma again. So that's his model. So I like it, but I'm really sorry that he had to call it something else. Doesn't automatically give credit to Gestalt therapy. Okay? Now we get into Gestalt
so
specifics.
can we make a break here? Sorry.
Sure. How much time do you need?
We were talking about 10 minutes, 10-minute break. Is it okay?
Okay. So, Alexi, can people go a little longer? We had set this for 90 minutes, but can people go longer?
Ну, давайте зробимо так, що ті, хто можуть, вони залишаться трішки довше. От.
So those they can stay longer, they will definitely stay, and I will stay for sure. Maybe others are also interested to listen to the end.
Okay, take 10 minutes. Okay.
Через 10 хвилин це 18:25 повертаємося сюди.
So 6:25.
Unfortunate. Okay, so we are back, and this, for most people, is probably the most interesting part. Instead of reading these different abstracts, I want to have them up on the screen as a way of pointing to them, but I'll just describe what these different things are. There's 3 examples of Gestalt specific research. This first one comes out of the Italian institutes run by Margherita Spagnuolo Loeb and her colleagues, and deals with what they call the aesthetic relational knowing. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that concept. I'm going to do a really brief description of it. But the aesthetic relational knowing, first word, aesthetic, has to do with the senses. So it's this sensorial knowledge, experience, the sensory experience of the therapist and of the client, but we're talking about the therapist here first, of the interaction that's going on. So the relational part, it's a back and forth, it's the dialogical piece. You meet with a client, you get the feel of that person, you practice observation in your phenomenological approach, you notice this thing or that thing, you bring it up to them, there's a movement, something happens, you see the muscles in their face contract, you notice it, you might say, I just noticed your muscles seem to be doing something, what's going on? That is a knowing. You know that there is something going on because the senses in the relational back and forth alerted you at a more intuitive level than perhaps you could even put into words. And so that sometimes I will say simply, what's going on? I won't do a lead up. I'm with the client. All of a sudden they affect me in a way because something going on with them. I sense it. I won't say anything more than what's going on or what happened right there. But that's my aesthetic relational knowing. So if you understand what this project was about is wanting to know if you could measure that in some way. And if you could use that in a way kind of like, well, this is what they did later on. Yeah. No, this, okay. So what they did to begin with, remember me talking about the pieces that build up to something? So this is the something that has already had a lot of projects preceding it. One project was to identify the aesthetic relational knowing as a concept. Another project was to see if they could create a instrument, a questionnaire that would be valid in itself. We'll talk about that later on. That could measure this thing. And then this one was, and then another one was to see if when they used that instrument, if they could see if there was a difference between therapists early on in their training, very early, and experienced therapists that had been in the field for years. So they wanted to see if they could tell using this instrument if there was a difference. And they could. And they can. So then another one, so that was like in training, to help with in training. What do we need to emphasize in order to help trainees get better trained? And that's how research was being and has been utilized in the Italian institutes that Margarita leads. This article is the aesthetic relational knowing of the therapist, a factorial validation of the ARC-T scale adapted for the therapeutic situation. So here they look more closely at the knowing that the therapist has, and it goes on for that. Conclusions. By enabling the assessment of body process awareness and aesthetic relational skills in therapy, the ARC-T scale has significant implications for the training and supervision of psychotherapists, as well as for research on the therapeutic change process. So somebody wanted to know in the questions they sent, are there any instruments? Are there any ways of measuring blah, 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 and so forth? And so here's one. It is Gestalt specific. It's an example of Gestalt specific research. Okay, here's another one. This is another example. This is, you may have already heard about this. This is the article was about the development and validation of the Gestalt therapy fidelity scale. Yep. I don't know if you've heard about it. So why is that? What is it, and why is that significant? A fidelity scale is something used to sort of suggest or prove, if you would, that what the therapist was doing in a research project was actually Gestalt therapy. I mean, what if you got a bunch of therapists together in your research project, and one was doing CBT and another one was doing ACT and another one was doing, and you want to make sure that you're actually studying the thing you want to study. So the validity scale is a way of giving of evaluating that. Another way of evaluating it is that you have a very experienced, well-qualified Gestalt therapist sitting in on the therapy when the therapy that you're researching was conducted. That would be very awkward in a lot of cases. So harder to accomplish. So the validity scale is you could do videotape it, and then somebody could use the validity scale to say, yes, that was Gestalt therapy. Okay, so how do you create this validity scale? That's what this whole article was about. So it's Gestalt specific, but it's really more specific to the important elements of doing research. This is something that enables us to do better research. So some types of Gestalt specific research is going to be on the actual therapeutic process. And sometimes it's going to be about the tools that we need to do that kind of research. So the ARC-T scale was about the scale that they used for that. This one is about the validity scale that says this was Gestalt therapy. Okay. This one is one that I was involved with. So this one is researching Gestalt therapy for anxiety in practice-based settings, a single case experimental design. So next time when we get into the research designs, there's a way of distinguishing what kind of project it was. And this one, when it says an experimental research design, that alerts people. I mean, experimental design, that alerts people to say, oh, that's a particular type of study. So this was a study done in Chile by Pablo Herrera Salinas, who is a fabulous guy. At the first research conference that I mentioned before, Pablo was there, and that's where I met him. And then we started talking, and eventually with Jan Rubal, and we decided to do this particular project. We could do it. We decided to do it in Chile because Pablo at his institute had been hired. His training was in research and Gestalt therapy. He had been hired by that institute to be the research guru for that institute. So it was kind of a nice setup. The institute conducted the research. Pablo led that. Jan Rubal and myself contributed, and Ilya, can never pronounce this guy's last name. He was born in Ukraine. He was living in Rostov-on-Don in Russia at the time. He's not living there anymore. He's living in Germany.
Where was he born? Sorry. Ah.
Yeah. So anyway, when we did this, the war wasn't going on. Anyhow. So this was a single case time series design. And when we get into the research designs, I'll tell you more about it, what that is. But this is, remember I said the gold standard is the group studies? This is a way of doing that level of research with just one case instead of these groups. And it lends itself more to the Gestalt approach. It's easier to do in private practice than the group studies can be done at the university level much more easily. The single case time series can be done more easily in individual practice. Which brings me to the issue of having an evidence-based practice. A lot of people would claim when they put out their marketing, I have an evidence-based practice. Okay, what is that? What does that mean? Either they read a lot of research literature and so they know what the evidence shows, and they pick the best research, the approaches that have the best research support. So it can mean that. It can also mean I conduct research on what I'm doing, and the research that I have, the results of that support what I do. See the difference? I'm doing the research, and the research that I have done shows that what I do is effective. Somebody could say, well, you're biased, but that's where you have to have your methodology down pat. And the single case time series model, research design, does that. It's really an exquisite way of doing efficacy studies. You could do, any one of you in practice, once you learn this, you could do it in your own practice, and you then can, depending on if you're effective, I guess, say, I'm practicing an evidence-based approach. It's called Gestalt therapy, but it's an evidence-based. What's your evidence base? Okay, then you can trot out your stuff. By the way, doing research is great, but is absolutely worthless unless it's published. So you could tell somebody that said, wait a minute, you do your own research? I don't know about that. That's one thing. But if you tell them, here's an article that I published in this peer-reviewed journal showing that what I was doing is effective. Whoa, all of a sudden that carries a lot more weight. The other part, we're getting into another lecture, but the other benefit of publishing is that the research that people do becomes known. So it affects the larger field and builds for more research. Okay, questions. If you're still here, any particular questions or comments, any comments, suggestions for the future, anything like that?
Так, я зазначу, що у нас, схоже, немає часу на питання. Можливо,
So I will
якщо
mention
вам
that
можливо сказати
looks like
якісь
we don't
відомості
have
або
time for
поділитись
questions now.
коментарями.
Maybe if you have any comments or you need to share some feedback, it's a good time for that.
Yeah. Here's one.
Mr. Rukaya?
May I? Yes. I would
Так,
like to.
Марина, якщо ти в українському каналі, то українською мовою, будь ласка, або переходь в
I
англійський
have
канал.
original audio.
It's
Тоді в
okay.
англійський перейди, будь ласка.
Okay. I would like to thank you. And you are talking about very important things because before psychology, I was into engineering and I was writing these articles and published too. And I understand how I was lacking this information. And when I begin to search. I searched a lot of English written articles, and I think we didn't learn about this at our study program. So it was just personal interest. And what are you talking about now is enlarging this knowledge, and I will also share this with my students who are currently studying to be in Gestalt psychotherapists. And
Great.
I'm very glad to see you in person because we have a small reading club and we have read your book and we were imagining how this person could look like. And so now I see and hear you.
Yeah, part of me wishes that I looked like I did when I was 28. Part of me goes, nah, this is okay. Yeah. Thank you. I would really recommend that you come back, people come back for the rest of these lectures. They touch on various different kinds of things that are relevant to the overall picture. And this, in many ways, was getting used to this format. For me, I'm used to sequential translation. And so I had to get used to the simultaneous thing. And to also gauge the time span and how much time that takes and so forth. So hopefully next lectures will be more fluid. Any other comments or suggestions? Anything?
Я додам, що тут багато людей дякують
I will
в
add that
чаті.
many people express their
Пишуть різні
gratitude in the
слова
chat. They write different words of gratitude.
Ну і, мабуть, від себе також додам, що я
And
теж
for
дякую, було
myself,
дуже цікаво.
I will
і,
also say, like, thank
мені
you very much. It was very
приклади конкретних
interesting.
досліджень.
And I loved the examples
Дуже
of
красиво
specific
слухали.
researches. It broadens the outlook.
Thank you. I have a question. I have a question for the translator. So I don't know how, as I'm speaking, you are translating what I said just before. How do you keep up with what I'm saying currently in order to give the translation next, if you know what I mean? Seems like you're doing two different things in your mind at the same time, and I could not do that for anything.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm just having much experience and I know the terminology. I'm also Gestalt therapist and supervisor and trainer. So it's, maybe the way of thinking of neural connections. So actually it goes a little bit maybe with a delay. So, and I can also, something I can predict, something I can just hang on and then summarize and maybe shorten, just so.
Okay.
Somehow like that. And does it answer your question? It can be
Yeah.
another research topic, maybe.
Yeah. All right. All right. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Так,
And yes, it was the Gestalt International Study Center. That was the name of that place. I'm looking through the chat. All right. All right.
так, дякую всім. Також пару слів, що я ще раз скину
Thanks, everybody.
посилання, можете
I've
теж до нашого
shared the links.
асоціації.
You can join our social networks, our association, and there you will get the information about the next lecture and all the links. And you can write me on all questions.
До зустрічі. Дякую, Філ.
Thank you, Phil, very much. It was also my pleasure to meet you. Thank you.